What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again. We got another quick video. Irony. Let's talk about it. So, in today's day and time, I keep seeing more and more influencers and more people who interact and use TikTok who happen to be white. And they consistently talk about how Muslim people are taking over America. Jewish people are taking over America. Hispanic people are taking over America. Immigrants are taking over America. Black people are taking over America with crimes and, leading the cause for crime and et cetera, et cetera. And it really puts them in a position to where you can really recognize that they're afraid. They are fearful for their safety. It's very ironic because for the past over 400 years, from pre-slavery, during slavery, after slavery, up until maybe the last 50 years, a person of color in America has had to struggle in the same ideology in which white people currently have right now, worried about their survivability through jobs and employment and food and housing and all the rest of these factors. I call them the 5 pillars. The 5 pillars are food, it's shelter, it's clothing, it's transportation, and it's recreational funds for activities, right? That's one of the reasons why we've continuously seen the progression that white people have spoken out against to try to re-solidify and re-secure themselves. And that's one of the reasons why Planned Parenthood was attacked the way it was, because it was white women that were actually, leading the cause, to my understanding, for abortions. And, again, it's very ironic because the same psychological position that white people are in, people of color have been in for over 400 years, up until, realistically, from I'm not even going to say that. It's really from 2000. Realistically, when you go look at the viability of people of color, especially black people in America, they only had it like a 10, 15 year span. Like from the 90s to maybe the 2010s, 2015, maybe 2000, from the 1990s to 2020s. Right, that was probably the best span that people of color had it in America, right? But since that time and before that time, people of color have worried and were afraid and scared about living in a society in which spent the last 400 plus years raping, murdering, enslaving, exploiting, disenfranchising, manipulating. And now, again, it's very ironic that white people find themselves in that position when they were the ones who were initially responsible for it in the first place. That's why I say this is one of the biggest forms of irony right now that white people find themselves in. Like, I hear people talk about, what's the guy named? Barry Bull. Barry Bull's a TikTok former Marine sergeant major or something like that. And he was talking something about how Dearborn, Michigan has a high presence of Muslim people, and they're from the Middle East. Well, newsflash, Dearborn's been like that for decades, and Dearborn doesn't have a high crime rate. Dearborn, has good equity, good schools, there's not a lot of negativity when it comes to Dearborn and the people that occupy Dearborn. Um, One of the downsides of um, some of the Muslim people whom orient and operate within, um, I think it's Michigan, right? Is a lot of them on liquor stores and gas stations, right? And, that exploitation is still available because, you know, alcohol is primarily their major uh, item that's sold, and tobacco products. And that's a disservice to the country as a whole. But most of those establishments are located within communities of color. And unfortunately, in these communities of color, it's very high in poverty, and they're very impoverished. And when you live in a impoverished community with a very low accessibility to resources, depression is very high. And unfortunately, when there is high depression and low poverty, 9 times out of 10, you don't have both parents in the household because one of the parents, primarily male, has done something extreme to try to facilitate some type of financial gain. And then the cycle just repeats itself, right? It's very repetitious, and that's how recidivism happens exponentially. And unfortunately, because this is America and it's a capitalist mentality instead of a unified front, because it is a free country and tobacco is free and alcohol is free, these people of color are exploited because, the unfortunate reality is this is where they go in order to ease their troubles. It's not like there's a major mental health facility or treatment centers within impoverished communities for people of color to where they can go in and get, counselors for depression, et cetera, et cetera. And again, most businesses within impoverished communities are not black owned because they don't have the work history, they don't have the capital, they can't get the loan from a business perspective because they don't have the credit. And it's been going on that for generation after generation and generation. It's the same consideration. If you were to take an individual whom doesn't have education and doesn't have a skill set and then give them a form of sustenance, what we call EBT or SNAP or WIC, and it never transcends anywhere because there's a lack of nurturing, there's a lack of counseling, there's a lack of mentorship, then each generation that goes on and on and on, because it's not like very successful or intelligent people are coming into impoverished areas to support up and coming adults to give them a better perspective. It's kind of like it's an area to where everybody shies away from because there's a lot of fear within the application of what's possible while going to visit these areas. And so the recidivism rates are very high because there's a lack of external influence, of successful external influence that goes into these communities. And that's why a lot of these communities are exploited by different forms of resources in which are required for specific needs based off of not necessarily the betterment of the community, but for the sustainment of the corporations that exist, right? And unfortunately, this is where the separation between, church and state really comes into play. And again, it's very ironic that white people find themselves in this position because for the longest time, they were the ones who were responsible for creating it and maintaining it and supporting it. But, as I've said before, as we continuously move forward collectively, these are the things that we have to identify. And if we are truly going to become a society or a country in which is unified, we have to stop looking at each other based off of race, color, creed, culture, and religion. And while we can have those, those cannot be at the forefront of who we are as American people, because as we know, we are only moving closer into a time to where resources are becoming more finite. And that means that square footage of land is going to become more scarce, which means that every person that populates every square foot, you need to make sure that these individuals, regardless of race, color, creed, or culture, are American first. Everything else second. Because only then can we make sure that our country is safe from top to bottom, from left to right, from in and out, and for every person, regardless of race, color, creed, culture, or religion. This is the only way forward, and I've said this before. The only way back to divinity is through unity.